right, hello, and welcome. We got a special guest here for everybody tonight. Richard Migliore, otherwise known as the MIG, is on with us. How you doing, Richard?
I'm doing well. Good day at the races, and always nice to talk to good people.
Hey Richard, how are you? You had a big day. The BAQ, as they call it today, Belmont at Aqueduct. Which can we just call it Aqueduct?
Yeah, that's
Or
fine
or,
with me.
or, or does that get you in trouble?
No, on air I have to refer to it as Belmont at the Big A, but we can call it Aqueduct, and I love Aqueduct. I won over 2,100 races here. I grew up about 10 miles from the racetrack. This is the first place I went racing when I was a real little kid with my dad. We'd come out. Back then, they didn't have winter racing. We'd always come out for the opening stake. The opening weekend stake would be the toboggan handicap. And I would tell my dad one time on the train ride home how I was going to win the toboggan handicap when I was a jockey. I was about 10 years old. And I won 6 toboggan handicaps, more than anybody. And it's a source of great pride for me because I knew at 10 that that's what I wanted to do. And how many people are fortunate to get to do what they want to do when they're 10 years old.
That's awesome. And let's talk about you grew up in Sheepshead, Brooklyn. Kind of a rough upbringing, right? You had to take care of yourself. You had to defend yourself a little bit growing up, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the kind of neighborhood. It was, rough and tumble kind of neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. Grew up with my brothers. Got in a lot of trouble, a lot of mischief, had a lot of fun. There was always a big group of kids that ran together, played a lot of sports, very few sports that we didn't do. Racing was always kind of on the periphery. My dad liked to bet. There was a bar on Coney Island Avenue that a lot of the action happened in the back of the bar. I would come to the races with him and I'd go study the Wood Memorial pictures. And Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn was a pretty cool place to grow up, though, because there was always something to do, either a sport to play or crabbing off the jetty or, collecting mussels or just, it was rough sometimes, but it was a great upbringing.
You ever played dice with the boys on the sidewalk?
Dice, can play any card game you want to know. Actually, probably rode a few years longer than I should have because I was still supplementing my income with racehorse rummy in the room. But
So, I believe you saw Willie Shoemaker win a race on TV, and that hit you. Other than how that hit you, did Willie have an impact on you as a young jockey at the beginning?
Well, there was a great book that he had put out in that time period, which my grandfather gave me. It was The Shoe, and it was an amazing, big, almost coffee table style book that had the most amazing pictures of horses and racing and Santa Anita and his career. And I love that book. I still have it. And my grandfather, inscribed on it for me and, basically encouraged me to follow my dream. Because I, like I said, from the time I was very young, I knew I wanted to be a jockey. But the 1976 Marlboro Cup, when he rode Forgo and caught Honest Pleasure, it's on YouTube. I would implore people who haven't seen it to watch it. There was no way he's going to win the race. There's no way he can catch Honest Pleasure. And he caught him in the last step. And I had ridden in a pony race that morning and won in the similar fashion, going 200 yards on a pony. And I got up and I told everybody that would listen that that's it. I'm going to be like Shoe. I'm going to do it. Now, when I won the Eclipse Award as champion apprentice, Bill Shoemaker presented me with the Eclipse Award. He won his first Eclipse Award as champion journeyman. Also, the first time I ever had a drink in my life was in Tokyo, Japan at 16 years old with Bill Shoemaker after the very first Japan Cup. So that, to think that I was a kid watching him win that race on TV, had that picture book of him, and now I'm having scotch with Bill Shoemaker in Tokyo at 16 years old. That's pretty heady stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so he's called the Shoe. You're called the MIG. Tell us about how that came about, because obviously you got you have a few brothers that maybe were also called the MIG, but tell us how it came about. You had mentioned it a little bit earlier to me.
Well, I mean, if you go to Wikipedia, they tell you it's because of a name for a Russian fighter jet, because which we all know is silly. It's easier to say than Migliore. So people, instead of botching my name, would say MIG, the MIG. But the first person to ever call me the MIG was a valet at Atlantic City. Now, you understand, I came up under a contract to Steve DeMauro, old school trainer, Eclipse Award winner, trained champions, Dealey Precious, Wajima, Lady Pitt. And I was very well schooled. So he had mapped out a plan for me to win the Eclipse Award. And that included riding a lot at night. So I would ride at Atlantic City on Friday and Saturday nights after riding at Belmont or Aqueduct all day. Meadowlands, obviously, in the fall. Charlestown some weekends. Wherever. Garden State actually was still running. But anywhere I could go, they had me riding night and day. And he told me that when you go in these jockeys' rooms, these guys are not going to like you. They feel like you're coming in to steal their money. I don't want you to get engaged. I want you to go in and be a professional. You do your job. You don't speak. Let your actions speak for yourself. You go in, ride, and leave. So I'd been in Atlantic City every weekend for over a month. And I don't talk. I don't say anything. I go in the room, head down, go out, win my races, get on a helicopter, land back at Belmont at 1 o'clock in the morning. There was one jock that was giving me a really bad time. And he's no longer with us, so I won't bring his name because I think it's disrespectful. He's passed. And he's on me and on me and on me. And he's always goading me and trying me. And one night I just couldn't take it anymore, and I went after him. And I basically mopped the jock's room with him. And the valets let it go because they had seen what he'd been doing to me for a month. And one valet was there and watched, knocking off my boots. And he goes, "This kid hasn't said 2 words in over a month. Who the hell knew he could fight like that?" And he called me the MIG fighter. That was the first person that ever referred to me in that sense.
That's great.
My boss had it right, though. I mean, you're better off just keeping your head down, staying in the business, and not get involved in that nonsense.
Well, I was going to ask you about Steve DeMuro, and obviously he had a great impact. I think he was maybe the first big trainer that gave you a jump start in your career, and you already mentioned him. But there's 2 things I do want to ask you: what it means and the impact it had of you winning the Eddie Caro Award, and also the Mike I think it's pronounced Venezia.
Yeah.
Venezia Memorial Award, which I find kind of I don't want to say ironic because you've always been known as a tough guy, tough rider and stuff, but I think both of those are pretty meaningful awards. So touch on that.
Well, yeah, that and the George Wolf Award, because the George Wolf Award, only your fellow riders vote on it. So to have that kind of respect from your peers feels really good, and I was very proud of that. The Mike Venezia Award means so much to me on so many levels because I was very close with Mike. We were very, very good friends. I knew his children when they were babies, and now they have children. And I was hurt actually when Mike was unfortunately got killed at Belmont, and I was up in Saratoga, and when I heard, I was in shock, and I took off in my car, and I was going 90 miles an hour down the Northway crying, and got pulled over, and the troopers were amazing. They, I explained what was going on, and they called for 2 other troopers to come in another car, drove my car back to my house in Saratoga, and stayed with me for a while, made me promise I wouldn't drive. And then the next day I went down, and it was so surreal for a long time that, you could lose somebody that quick. And I was still very young. I had broken my neck for the first time earlier in the year, and I was spent almost 6 weeks in the hospital. And Mike would come pretty much every day, and just sit there and chat. And he was a big history buff. So he, to have somebody that was so meaningful to you and to lose them, and then to be honored with an award in their name, it actually gets me a little emotional. It means a great deal. And the Eddie Caro Award is more for what you accomplished that year. I won it twice in New York by being the leading rider for the entire year in New York. And, Eddie Caro was a mythical character to me. I got to meet him in Miami through a former rider, Sam Rennick, and got to ask him questions. And I always traveled with a couple of books in my tack trunks. One was Winners Never Quit and Quitters Never Win. And one of the other ones was I Ride to Win by Eddie Arcaro, and I always would just kind of go back to those books for inspiration and to kind of see how the old school did it. And pretty cool that I still always considered myself a little bit of an outlier. I didn't grow up in a horse family, and then to have access to these kind of people and be honored in that way in this game always still feels very special to me.
I'm going to turn it over to Chris, but before I do, one last question. Actually, I have a couple of questions, so I'll follow up later. But did you ever hear the stories of Eddie Arcaro sliding down the banisters at Hialeah Park?
No, I never heard those.
Did you ever race at Hialeah? I mean, I haven't looked it up.
Yeah, so I did race at Hialeah, but even more so, my first winter, I got down to Hialeah. I was 15 years old, galloping horses for Steve DeMauro. Was enchanted with the place. It was still the first dates before Gulfstream wrested the first dates away. The place was as beautiful. To me, it was like a museum. It had that feeling of being on hallowed ground. And I lived in the tack room in Barn P. We were down there the whole month of December, and Steve had promised he would get me in school down there, and Mr. DeMauro, and nobody brought up school the whole month of December. And I'm thinking I'm skating. I'm not going to have to go back to school. I finished 3 months of ninth grade, and I'm good, and after the holidays, after New Year's, he brought me to Hialeah High School to try to enroll me. And ultimately I didn't get enrolled there because, I gallop in horses. I had to gallop till 10:30. I needed to start the school day with the other kids, even though I needed to take only 3 classes. So eventually he got me homeschooled by a really nice woman and her husband. I would go to their home 3 days a week. They were incredibly nice people. They'd take me to dinner before dropping me back at the track. I think they were like a little bit like, wow, this kid lives at the track. But it was a great time to be a kid at the track, and particularly to be in a place like Hialeah.
All right. So, and then for our viewing audience and listeners, explain the beauty of Hialeah. Like for me, Saratoga has a place in my heart just because Saratoga is Saratoga, and I've been coming up here for 26 years now. But the first track I ever went to was Hialeah as a kid, and I still go there, and I'll just walk around, and I'm still in awe of the place. Your feelings on Hialeah?
Probably the most beautiful racetrack I've ever been to. I know it's changed a lot because of weather. I know hurricanes took down a bunch of the palm trees and stuff, but riding horses down that sandy horse path with, under the boughs of the huge palm trees, the royal palms, and
the bougainvilleas on the side of the building.
Just the smell, the sights, the sounds. Being a kid from Brooklyn too, seeing chameleons, run by you, and it felt very tropical to me. They had the sales pavilion back then on the backstretch of the other side of the racetrack at Hialeah, so the sales would be there. The jockey's room, the architecture of the place, just sensational. You really get that feel of that swanky kind of, again, tropical feel to it. The flamingos, the whole thing, I just was so amazing. And I'm just so blessed that I got to experience that. First time I laid eyes on my wife was at Hialeah at 15 years old, and kind of knew then we were going to wind up, and here we are married 36 years now. But
that's
very,
awesome.
very special place. Yeah.
That's awesome. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you just said that about your wife. What's her backstory? How was she involved in racing?
Well, so my wife was basically a show rider and was an alternate on the Olympic team. Got hurt, didn't get to compete, wound up gravitating towards the racetrack, went to work for the Boniface family at the Bonita Farm in Maryland, the original Bonita Farm, not the one they have now. And it was getting cold, it was getting towards winter, and somebody was going to Hialeah. She decided to take a chance. She came to Hialeah, wound up, I'll condense the story, got a job with Steve DeMauro. She's a few years older than me. We were friends. She worked her way up to be the assistant. We started dating before I started riding. Everybody thought I was 2 years older than I was. That was a point of contention later on. We got past it, obviously. But a tremendous rider, tremendous horsewoman. Went on to be assistant trainer at Green Tree Stable for Bobby Reinecker. Actually won a race for her at Aqueduct over the winter one year when they left her behind with the 8 or 10 Green Tree horses that didn't go to Aiken, South Carolina. Really good horsewoman. Honestly, one of the best horse people I've ever been around in my entire life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All the races that you were in, and I know you won over 4,000 of them. What are the couple of them that really stick out to you, Mig?
Well, obviously your first win is always a big deal. My first stake win on Island Charm for Steve DeMauro here at Aqueduct in the Vagrancy Handicap was a huge deal. Winning the Pacific Classic on Student Council was huge because that was a real difficult time. I had gotten hurt 3 years in a row in New York. My business had dried up a lot. I kind of was at a crossroads feeling like maybe I should retire. And Ron Anderson, who had Garrett Gomez at the time, one of the greatest agents of all time, grabbed me one morning. He said, you still ride a good race. You're not getting any opportunities. You ever think about a change of scenery? You want to come to California? And I went out there and did really well, kind of reinvented myself, re-energized my career, invigorated my career. But I was flying home most Sunday nights on the red eye, being home Monday, Tuesday, flying back on Wednesday morning. Carmela's carrying the ball with the kids. The kids are in school. I'm only home a couple days a week. We had made a conscious decision my whole career to never allow my career to dictate the kids' lives. We didn't want them having to uproot, leave school, leave friends. So it was a sacrifice. It was a hard time for everybody. Then they're out for Del Mar for the entire summer. We rented a house down by the beach, and I wanted to make memories. I wanted my kids to have, have a summer that they've looked back on fondly, that we all were together, especially because we had been everybody was sacrificing so much. So to win the Pacific Classic with them there and them in the winner's circle, and then having a party out on the beach afterwards. Ron had gone back to New York with Garrett. I had Scotty McCullen as my agent, another great agent. He threw a big party on the beach right down from where we were living. And to have that time, that moment, to be able to share it so intimately with my family, and particularly in light of all the sacrifice everybody had been going through, that was probably the most emotional, meaningful win in my entire career. And not just because it was that big a race, it was just because I got to spend it with them.
That's great. That's great. And the other thing, so what was the rotation back in those days when you were a jockey? Because right now I've got it figured out that, where the Naira colony goes and, everybody goes down south. Did you stick with Naira the whole entire time?
I liked racing in New York in the winter. It lent itself to a lot of stability family-wise. And what's life about? Life is about finding balance. There's things you have to do and you want to do. And professionally, that's one side of the coin. But the other side of it is your personal life and your family and doing right by everybody. So if you can find that balance, and people don't remember a lot of years, particularly in the 80s, most riders stayed. Angel Cordero, George Velasquez, Eddie Maple, Jerry Bailey, they all stayed. Jose Santos, I stayed. The purses were much bigger here. You could fly out on weekends to ride stakes other places. So, over time, I feel like it was a very unfair rap. Mig's the all-time leading rider in New York, but, he stayed all those winters at Aqueduct. The competition was fierce a lot of those winters. But I did it because it was the right thing for my family. I could be fulfilled professionally. I could be fulfilled personally. My wife and kids appreciated it. I'd be home at 5:30 at night having dinner with my family, which is something I always felt was very important, to have that time with your family around the dinner table to talk about everybody's day. And so, there were a couple of times I had to go to Florida. I was riding for John Kimmel. He was a big stable. But most of the years, if I could, I stayed put, and I was very happy doing it. Ramon Dominguez did it for a while, and everything's perception. When he did it, people talked about how noble it was. No, he was doing what was right for his family and his career, just like I was. It's just funny how people's perceptions can change from, generation or era to era, if you will.
Hey,
Absolutely.
Mick, just as a follow-up to that, I was having a conversation with a couple of people about what's it like for a jockey that's a local jockey, say at Colonial or at some of these other smaller tracks, when they have a big card and these big jockeys come in, and some people say it's like almost taking food off their table, so to speak. Just kind of touch on that from both sides of the perspective.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I started my career in New York. So basically, I rode my entire life, and I guess at an A track or the big time, if you want to frame it that way. I don't know. But I remember being an apprentice and being so excited on a weekend when Lafitte Pingai and Bill Shoemaker and Chris McCarron were coming in. Now, I also was an apprentice. I wasn't riding, the big races then, but to have them in the room and the mutual respect amongst top riders. Now, I think the feeling at most tracks, let's say like a Colonial on a big day, guys coming in, is there's still that respect. These guys understand the struggle. You don't just show up one day and you're like a top rider. You go through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of hurt, a lot of determination, hard work. The thing I tell young riders is you can't control when you'll get an opportunity. The only thing you can control is your work ethic and your preparation, being ready, being prepared for that opportunity when it comes and making the most of it. I can work 100 horses for a guy. He doesn't have to ride me. But when the call comes, I've got to step up and make the most of that opportunity. So I do think that all riders have that understanding that it's just not easy to get there. It's just not easy to do at any level.
Sure. And then you kind of touched on it. So obviously, injuries are part of the profession. You've had your share, if not maybe more than your share of them. Talk about some of those if you can, and how is your body doing since post jockey life? Are you waking up in the morning and taking steps like an 80-year-old, or
70? No. Listen, I'm bearing the brunt of some of the things I went through, and I don't have a pain-free day. Most of my problems come from my spine. I broke my neck twice. I broke my back. I have plates and screws and hardware in my neck and back. I actually probably gonna have more surgery later this fall to try to relieve some of the pain that I'm in. But I would do it again. If they'd let me go back, I'd go back now. I'd lose 35 pounds and go back to it, or 30 pounds and go back to it. I loved it. I loved everything about being a jockey. I loved the hard work. I loved getting up early in the morning. I loved the anticipation of working a new horse, maybe getting on the next good horse, the routine of it. That was one of the hardest things for me when I had to stop. Because you got to understand, by the time I was 12, I was training to do it. By the time I was 16, I'm a professional. I would get done working horses. I'd be in the jockey's room by 10 o'clock in the morning. My routine was so regimented. And then I'd have a routine at 44, do something from 16 to 44. And now, what do you mean? I don't have to be here. I don't have to do this. I don't, have to work out. I don't have to be in the steam room. I don't have to eat a certain way. It took me a year to get comfortable with the idea of eating lunch. I was so used to eating one meal a day. And I missed that routine, and I missed that camaraderie of the room, and even the competition of it.
that's like every athlete. They miss the locker room. They miss the routine of getting up in the morning. Say if you're a basketball player, getting up early, going to work out, doing shoot arounds, coming back in, hitting the steam room, hitting the sauna, whatever it might be. And I'm fortunate to know a lot of athletes, and with you guys, it's the same thing. You guys are, I've always said that jockeys are the best athletes in the world. People don't understand what you guys go through. So,
well, what differentiates a rider is that there's no season. It's basically year round. You don't win the Kentucky Derby and there's a microphone in your face. Hey, what are you going to do? I'm going to Disney World, like if you won the Super Bowl or the World Series. You're flying off someplace to ride the next day. The demands of making weight, boxers and wrestlers go through this, but they have periods of time between fights where they can relax and let themselves be more of their natural weight. I'm 145 pounds now. I rode at 114. I lived on 700 calories a day. I'm not heavy now. I'm what I was always supposed to do. But to have to do that every day and the constant pressure of that and living life on the scale. Wake up in the morning, first thing you do on the scale. Last thing you do before you go to bed, on the scale. 20 times in between, on the scale. Living life looking through a keyhole. But again, everything's risk and reward. And enjoyed it so much. But that's what differentiates jockeys. You have to have a different kind of dedication. Then you've got to be able to understand, especially after the first time you've been hurt bad, and you realize how much the ground can bite and how big horses really are, to be able to put that out of your mind and say, no, I'm good. I'm not going to worry about that. I mean, that's anybody who says they don't have fear, there's probably something wrong with them if that's true, or they're lying, right? But to have an acknowledgement of fear and being able to do what needs to be done the right way, that's what courage is. And that's what I think, embodies riders. They hey, yeah, I know this can happen, but I'm going to go out there and do it to the best of my ability, and I love it.
Mig, I wanted to shift gears, and I just wanted to ask you about Mig the handicapper, because you've done really well for yourself after the jockey life and doing all the things and bouncing around at some different places. How did you learn to handicap? How'd you get into that piece of the business?
Well, as a rider, you always handicap. You handicap differently because you're on a specific horse. So the way you're handicapping is not who's going to win the race, but how can I win the race? So you become very astute at pace, where the pace is coming from, understanding the flow of a race, where you might need to be positioned to take advantage. There might be a huge favorite. And you go, well, how can I beat this horse? Well, wow, this horse can engage him. That horse might be able to engage him. If I can put myself here, or maybe put him in a pickle, like, a jockey's job is to compromise his competition within the boundaries of the rules. So you always handicap. Now, the difference now is, and this is where I think I go wrong sometimes. When I look at a race, I go, who would I like to ride? That's how I originally approach it. And it might be a big favorite. Well, I'm not giving the public any real big information that they can't already have for themselves or see for themselves. All right, so who can upset this horse, and how can this horse be beaten? And then I'll look for that horse to try to give people a different perspective and say, well, yes, the 3-horse looks really tough in here, but I could see a situation where maybe he could, get beat by this horse because. So that's kind of how I approach it now. And we have so much technology now, going online, looking at replays, watching replays. It was a big help especially when the Intertrack was all speed. You could look at the race on paper and say, well, there's 3 speeds and I'm one of those 3 speeds. Go watch replays and realize those other 2 horses don't have gate speed, meaning their first step or 2 aren't as good as my horses. Well, now I can take the drop on them and basically make the decision for their riders that they're going to rate, because I'm going to take the racetrack away from them.
That's great. And what about your routines? Like, you're obviously on TV today doing all these shows. What does that look like? Do you cap the day before? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm usually one day in front of the next card. I try not to get that much further in front of that, because then they start getting jumbled to me. I do make notes. I rely a lot on pedigree query. I like to, especially horses trying a different surface for the first time or debuting horses. What did their siblings do? Were there horses that were precocious in the family? Were there horses that were successful on this surface in the family? And workout reports, things like that. I've made some of my better scores since I kind of wound up on this side of it, when I'm out in the morning and one catches my eye, and follow them back to the barn and find out the skinny, who's that and when they're going to run. And I've always had a pretty good eye for what a good horse looks like and the mechanics of their stride and what they should look like when they're traveling.
All right, so Mig, just to close things up, first and foremost, we really appreciate you jumping on and giving us the time that you have. Best horse you ever rode?
The best horse I ever rode, nobody ever heard of. He only ran once. He was a Rokeby stable horse by Tom Rolfe. His name was Hijinks. And I had worked him a week or so before. At the time, they had a really good horse named Winter's Tail, stakes horse. And Jeffrey Fell was riding. He was working Winter's Tail, and he needed a workmate. So Mac Miller had me come get on this maiden, Hijinks. And he said, just jump off a couple inches in front of him. He'll blow by at the 8th pole. Well, he got to me at the 8th pole, and Hijinks left him, blew him away. So we ran Hijinks at Belmont, 7 furlongs. He won by 22 lengths. He ran 7/8 and 20 and change.
Ooh.
Couldn't pull him up. His next workout, he bowed his tendon, and he never ran again. And ultimately, to Rokeby Stable in Virginia. And when he got sound, he became Paul Mellon's riding horse. But he was the most freak talent I ever sat on in my life. And even as a kid, I kind of recognized, I imagine that's probably what Flavien Prat feels like when he rides Flightline. And you can go to pedigreequery.com, and if you put in hijinks, I think it's HIJINKS, or it might be HIGH. There's a little thing on top. You click on it, it'll say hijinks won by 22 lengths, Belmont Park, 7/8, and like 20-3. Hidden Lake was my favorite ride because she was a jockey's dream. Didn't need a trip. They went really fast, she could come from last. If they went really slow, she could go to the lead. If there was this much space on the inside, she'd bully her way through. She was brave. If she was wide, she wouldn't hang. She was absolutely a doll to ride. But honestly, there's so many claiming horses and horses that meant so much to me. I mean, I have a horse that I won one race on for Michael Hushin named Phone in the Money, that he's on my farm, a pasture ornament, eating us out of house and home because he needed a place to go, and I won a race on him.
Nice. Well, all right, last question then, and this is a great way to close this out because it's such a hot topic. You brought up Flightline. Mm-hmm. Obviously an incredibly special horse. It's blown away everybody he's raced against. Maybe not run against greatest competition, small fields and what have you.
Sure.
I saw something that his stride is longer than Secretariat's. So to me, that hit me. It was like, okay, now there's something there. There's something of substance. Give us your synopsis of Flightline.
Well,
and if you think he actually runs into BC because he's never come back in 6-8 weeks.
Okay, you kind of broke up, and I lost the last part of the question. I'm sorry.
The last part was, and also an opinion on whether you believe that he's actually going to run in the Breeders' Cup, because he's never come back in 8 weeks' time because I guess he's got bad feet. So,
well, I do think we'll see him in the Breeders' Cup. The way he got a 1.25 miles. I am. Listen, I'm obviously his soundness is going to dictate that, but John Sadler's done an amazing job of keeping him together and obviously spacing his races. But yeah, I think that we'll see him there. To kind of couch what I'm going to say here, I don't like to compare generations. I think it's unfair to the horses. I think it's unfair to athletes in general.
You're back.
I'm sorry. So what I was saying about Flightline is, like, I don't like to compare generations. Man O'War in the 1920, greatest horse of all time, he was racing against the full crop of 1200. Now, that doesn't take any. He beat what was in front of him and beat them decisively. I've been blessed to see some of the greatest horses of my generation since the mid 70s. Spectacular Bid, Seattle Slew. I saw Secretariat on TV and never saw him live. Affirmed, on and on. Forgo, all kinds of great horses over the years. I will say this: Flightline's performance in the Pacific Classic was as good as any performance I've ever seen. And so I'm not going to say he's better than this horse or worse than that horse. That's as good a performance as I've ever seen. So that puts him in pretty lofty company.
Fair enough. I'm like you. I don't like comparing generations because it's hard to do. I mean, it's like in baseball. I mean, if you just look at statistics, Babe Ruth is easily the greatest baseball player of all time. But you're talking about 1920s, 1930s versus 2022. So you can't compare everything so much different. And especially, this is a once in a lifetime generation horse. And I want to applaud it and give it all the just due that it deserves. I'm totally rooting for it because the sport only benefits from having a superstar like him. And I hope he stays sound and races at 5. I hope so. But in today's day with the breeding money that's out there, I'm not so sure.
Well, listen, that's part of the issue too, is that horses are not as durable as they once were. When one person owned a lot of horses, they would cull a lot of horses. They wouldn't get to reproduce. Now, one horse is owned by a lot of people, and a horse that wins a minor stake is getting a stud deal someplace. So you're not basically breeding the best to the best anymore. And A lot of people are breeding now to sell. So if they can get a 2-year-old and go on 8th and 10 and they sell them, they had their Kentucky Derby. And I just don't think that is healthy for the horses. I don't think it's healthy for the game. So we don't see horses having these comprehensive campaigns anymore. It was unusual to see a horse run every 2 weeks. Now it's, he's coming back quick in 3 weeks or a month. Again, I grew up in a generation, I could ride a horse on consecutive Saturdays. And no one was thinking twice about it. The game has changed a lot in that respect. And I understand people's angst, like they want to see more of it. But I think what we do get to see, we have to appreciate, especially when you see a great performance. I look forward to next summer, guys. Great talking with you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, you, Meg.
Appreciate it, Meg.